Well, good morning. My name is Rocky Moretti. Moretti is spelled Moretti, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research with TRIP. TRIP is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. We are an organization that advocates for a safe, efficient, and well-maintained transportation system. And we do that by providing the public the latest data on the condition of its roads and bridges, the level of traffic congestion, traffic volume trends, and also traffic safety regionally and statewide and at the national level. As an organization, TRIP is supported by a coalition of manufacturing, insurance, construction, labor, and engineering organizations. And we've been putting reports out since 1971. Next year will be our 50th anniversary. The format for this event is after I speak, we're going to hear from three members of the Assembly. We'll hear from William Magnarelli, John McDonald, Patricia Fahey, and then we will hear from Thomas O'Connor, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Capital Regional Chamber, and then finally from Johnny Evers, Senior Director of Government Affairs, the Business Council of New York State. Carolyn Kelly on the TRIP staff is monitoring today's news conference, and if members of the media have questions, you can, there's on the Zoom, there's a function where you can indicate that you have a question, and following our initial comments, Carolyn will then put anyone with a question onto the panel so that you're able to ask the question live and just direct that question to whichever speaker that you'd like to. TRIP's new report, Transportation by the Numbers, takes a look at the latest data across New York State for its transportation system in terms of its condition and the performance of that system, and then also looks at that data regionally. TRIP estimates that statewide, the cost to the public of driving on roads that are often in poor condition, of traffic congestion, which cause delays and waste time, and also the economic cost of serious and fatal traffic crashes in which the lack of adequate roadway safety features contributed to the seriousness of the accident is $26 billion. TRIP estimates that the average motorist in the Albany area, TRIP estimates that the average motorist in the Albany area is spending an additional $2,168 annually in the cost of driving on rough roads, which is beating up their vehicles, the cost of lost time and wasted fuel due to traffic congestion, and the cost of serious and fatal traffic crashes. TRIP estimates that the average cost of motorists in the Syracuse area of driving on rough roads, which is beating up their vehicles, the cost of traffic congestion, which caused delays and wasted fuel, and also the cost of serious traffic crashes is $1,384. The TRIP report includes data for the largest metro areas in the state, and so that allows the public to really take a look at what those costs are regionally. The report finds that in New York, 25% of major roads are rated in poor condition and 22% are in mediocre condition. In the Albany area, the TRIP report finds that 22% of major roads are in poor condition and 24% are in mediocre condition. In the Syracuse area, the TRIP report finds that 18% of major roadways have pavement in poor condition and 23% have pavements in mediocre condition. TRIP report also looked at bridge conditions and found that in New York, 10% of the state's bridges are rated structurally deficient. These bridges are in immediate need of repair and in some cases replacement. The report found that in the Albany area, 9% of the region's bridges are rated structurally deficient and in immediate need of either repairs or in some cases replacement. In the Syracuse area, the TRIP report found that 11% of the region's bridges are rated structurally deficient and are currently in need of either significant repairs or in some case replacement. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit back in the spring or late winter, it obviously had a significant impact on travel in New York. In fact, by April, travel in New York was 45% lower than it was from the previous April. But by September, we saw that traffic and vehicle travel in New York was 10% less than the previous year, Obviously, as the economy started to move forward again, and we started to get further into the pandemic. Obviously, as we all know, the next several months are going to be very challenging, but as we work our way out of this pandemic, the data indicates that we're going to see vehicle travel returning to pre-pandemic levels. The TRIP report found that traffic congestion in the Albany area is currently creating additional 49 hours annually of delays for Albany area drivers, and they're wasting an additional 21 gallons of fuel annually. In the Syracuse area, the report finds that the average motorist is spending an additional 18 hours annually stuck in traffic and wasting 8 gallons of fuel annually in additional delays tied to traffic congestion. The report also took a look at traffic safety in New York State. We know that when needed roadway safety improvements are made, everything from adding rumble strips to improving intersection design, to adding turn lanes, to improving lighting, to making pedestrian and bicycle facilities safer, that we see a significant improvement in traffic safety. The report points out that in the Albany area, on average over the last 5 years, there have been 76 traffic fatalities. The TRIP report also found that from 2014 to 2018, on average, there were 88 traffic fatalities annually in Syracuse. Clearly, we know we can make significant improvements in traffic safety, but we have to be able to make the investments that are necessary. It's also critical that the state's economy very much rides on the ability to move freight. We've seen that during the pandemic when supply chains have become even more important. And we see annually $1.3 trillion worth of goods being shipped to and from sites in New York State. And the latest data indicates that by 2045, that the value of goods shipped to and from New York State is going to increase by 154%. So the quality of our transportation system is absolutely vital to the state's ability to recover from the pandemic and move forward and create the type of state that we want in New York to support a high quality of life. In addition to additional local and state investment, which is going to be absolutely vital, a strong federal program is also critical in supporting future investment in roads and bridges, but also public transit. The current federal program, which is a significant source of funding for highways and transit in New York, expires next September. So it'll be critical for the next Congress to put in place a well-funded long-term program. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Assemblymember Mangano.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the National Transportation Research Nonprofit, or TRIP, and the Associated General Contractors of New York for inviting me to today's event. There's no secret that further investment is needed in our transportation infrastructure. This new report just further confirms this. As the state seeks to recover from the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, I strongly believe that investment in infrastructure will be one of the fastest ways government can create jobs and support growth in other industries. It is my hope that the Biden administration will make infrastructure investment a priority in the first 100 days of his administration. The lack of leadership and clarity from the federal government on this issue has negatively impacted the ability of New York State to make additional investments. For example, New York State Department of Transportation's 5-year capital program was up for renewal this year. Unfortunately, and this was before COVID, unfortunately, the lack of new federal highway allocations meant that we could only pass a 2-year plan. Despite this, we did allocate in our budget $6.9 billion in 2020-2021 state budget for the DOT capital program, an increase of over $4.5 billion allocated last year. However, the need continues to grow each year and additional investment is required. It will be a priority of the Assembly Transportation Committee and myself to find additional funds for our entire transportation system in 2021. Our economy simply cannot recover if our roads, bridges, rail, and public transportation systems are not adequately cared for. Again, I thank Tripp for this new report, and I look forward to reviewing it in further detail as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Assemblymember John McDonald.
Well, thank you, Rocky, and good morning to my colleagues and all those who are participating today. And to Tripp, I want to thank you for what is a sobering report on the conditions of our roads, and more importantly, the connection to the impact to the average resident. The fact that here in the capital region, the average resident loses over $2,000 annually due to the conditions of the roads is something that should get all of our attention, and all of our attention immediately. I want to thank our transportation chair, Mr. Magnarelli, for pointing out the fact that the federal government has not been as good of a partner as they could be to not only New York State, but the other states throughout the country. As a former mayor, but also as the former chairperson of the Metropolitan Planning Organization here in the capital region for 12 years, I know all too familiar where the funding gaps are. And much of it lies with the federal government. Fortunately, here in New York State, the state has picked up the mantle and run with it, as the chairperson had indicated in regards to the road projects and the capital projects that we approved. Still, we need to continue to have that difficult discussion throughout this state about how we're going to provide sustainable funding to fix our roads and our bridges. Let's face it, the gas tax at the federal level hasn't been raised since Ronald Reagan was president. Hasn't been raised since Ronald Reagan was president. That's several presidents ago. And although nobody wants to raise taxes, we need to find a way to do this, particularly as our economy and our drivers are moving towards electric vehicles. So that gas tax, whether it's federal and state, is not going to be a sustainable fund going forward. So we need to start having those discussions because we want to make sure we have a positive impact on the environment. But at the same token, as this report clearly points out, our roads, our bridges are suffering, and so are our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Assemblymember Patricia Faith.
Thank you. And good morning. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you for sharing your report. Numbers matter, and the numbers are sobering. I want to agree with both of my colleagues. As the chairman of our transportation committee, Assemblyman Magnarelli said, we have a lot of work to do. New York has stepped up in a huge way to do this, but we absolutely cannot do it alone. And as Assemblyman McDonald said, the gas tax is no longer the sufficient in terms of helping us here locally. So absolutely, infrastructure matters, safety matters. People want some level of confidence when they go out on our roads and streets. So we need that federal help, and I couldn't agree more with Mr. Magnarelli. It should be in the first 100 days. We thought that would happen 4 years ago, quite frankly. There was bipartisan agreement. We thought we'd see infrastructure investments, and we didn't. So let's hope we will see that in the first 100 days. A couple of other things on this. I often say the safest place to be under COVID is outdoors, right? So in order to get to those outdoors, we need safer pedestrian crossings. We need the traffic calming infrastructure investments that have made a tremendous difference here in Albany, where I live, as well as in New York City and other places. And we need those bike lanes to make sure that all are safe. We have an aging baby boomer population in this state, so those pedestrian crossings are absolutely essential, as well as sidewalks where applicable. We also know we're not in the top 10 of electric vehicles. We're not even in the top 10 among states, and we've got a lot of catching up to do, since vehicle emissions are one of the top contributors to climate change. In order to do that, we need to make sure we've got the electric vehicle infrastructure in place. So as we're investing in these roads and bridges and alternative transportation, rebuilding in some cases our public transportation, we've also got to include some of that infrastructure as well. So a lot can be done, and in some cases, it's literally a matter of more paint. It's unbelievable what paint can do in making sure that we have safer pedestrian crossings, as well as bike lanes, as well as safer bus lanes. So sometimes it's a matter of paint investments, but there is a list of many projects and many needs, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you for continuing to champion these transportation infrastructure needs, and we certainly hope better days are ahead. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. And we'll now hear from Thomas O'Connor, who's with the Capital Regional Chamber.
Thank you, Rocky. Good morning. So I'd like to provide you with the business community's take on this important report. Yet again, it seems almost every year we have this same discussion. So commerce relies on infrastructure of all types, including transportation. Without it, you absolutely cannot conduct business. It doesn't matter if you're big, small, relying on internet, does not matter. You have to have that infrastructure. The only way you get that infrastructure is to maintain it, improve it, and that relies on proper investment, which has not happened. So we'll be lobbying on every level of government, federal, state, local, to let our decision makers know that this is a top priority. We have to address it, particularly under COVID. We absolutely have to address it. As Rocky had mentioned, the cost of our rough roads in the capital region is causing our drivers $2,000 annually. Frankly, I'd rather see them spending that money in our Main Street businesses than on just driving within the capital region. In our Main Street businesses during COVID, they need everything they can get, and that includes people willing to spend money in getting to our main streets without having to drive over potholes, unsafe bridges. I think Capital Region, New York Staters, they deserve more. And I think the bottom line is you really have to say investment in infrastructure provides economic growth, jobs, and really good opportunities for our business community. So thank you, Rocky.
Thank you. And we'll now hear from Johnny Evers, who's with the Business Council of New York State.
Well, thank you, Rocky, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Good morning to everybody. The Business Council of New York State, for those that don't know, it is the state affiliate of the National Association of Manufacturers and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We have been advocating for business and industry since 1914. I've been doing this for the Business Council and remember as far back as 2000 with the New York State Bond Act for Transportation. I think the most important thing to think about when we get the TRIP report, and those that advocate for this all the time, like AGC here in New York State, is you need a plan. And I think as was mentioned by some members of the Assembly, New York State has a plan. We're waiting to do a 5-year capital plan for both DOT and the MTA. We're waiting for the federal government to act. Assemblywoman Faith mentioned back in the beginning of the current administration federally, we were promised, it was touted as high as $1 trillion. But all of these plans need to have the specifics that are laid out by TRIP. And we're very grateful that we have partners that do this professionally full-time that will tell us about the road deficiencies, the bridge deficiencies. The last thing we need in New York State is more infrastructure, representing manufacturers, transportation companies, even those that buy through the internet that's been mentioned. It has to get to the end user. Without the roads and bridges in New York State being a top-notch performance, business and industry would grind to a halt. The 2,400 member companies that we have are some of the leaders in the world that day in, day out provide goods and services to those in New York State. We appreciate the opportunity to lend our support to TRIP. We really appreciate it, Rocky. Every year we look through this, we sit down, we go through it, and we're hoping that one day the capital plans on the state and federal levels will match up and we can get away from the deficiencies and have all good roads, all good bridges. There's a multiplier effect with those that design it, build it, and use it. And here in New York State, we're greatly appreciative of all your hard work. This business and industry and the 18 million people in New York State depend on the roads and bridges here. So thank you. Glad to be here and lend our support.
Thank you. Before we invite questions, I noticed that we have journalists on the call from Binghamton and Utica, and I had not provided data for those regions. So if I'll ask your indulgence, I'm going to quickly give the data for Binghamton and Utica, and any journalists who do have questions can indicate on the line, and Carolyn Kelly on the TRIP staff will let you in. The TRIP report finds that driving on Binghamton, excuse me, let me just start over. The TRIP report finds that the average motorist in the Binghamton area is spending an additional $1,383 annually in the cost of driving on rough roads, which is beating up their vehicle, the cost of lost time and wasted fuel due to traffic congestion, and the cost of serious and fatal traffic crashes. The TRIP report finds that in the Binghamton area, 33% of major roads have pavement in poor condition, and another 15% are in mediocre condition. The report finds that 6% of the bridges in the Binghamton area are currently rated structurally deficient and in need of significant repairs, and in some cases replacement. The TRIP report finds that the average motorist in the Binghamton area is spending an additional 16 hours annually stuck in traffic and wasting additional 7 gallons of fuel annually due to traffic delays caused by traffic congestion. Over the last 5 years, on average in the Binghamton area, there have been 29 people killed annually in traffic crashes. And that's a number that could be reduced by implementing cost-effective roadway safety features. The TRIP report finds that in the Utica area, the average motorist is spending an additional $1,264 annually in the cost of driving on rough roads, which is beating up their vehicle, in the value of lost time and wasted fuel due to traffic congestion, and the economic cost of serious and fatal traffic crashes. The TRIP report finds that in the Utica area, 12% of major roads have pavements in poor condition and 28% are in mediocre condition. Our report finds that in the Utica area, 12% of the region's bridges are rated structurally deficient. These are bridges in immediate need of repair and in some cases replacement. The TRIP report finds that the average motorist in the Utica area is spending an additional 17 hours annually stuck in traffic and wasting an additional 7 gallons of fuel annually due to delays caused by traffic congestion in the region. The TRIP report finds that on average, 29 people are being killed every year in the Utica area in traffic crashes. And we know that when cost-effective roadway safety features are provided to keep motorists, pedestrian, and bicyclists safer, that we can see a much safer travel environment and we can save lives in the region. Okay, Carolyn, are there any questions at this point?
No, I don't see any that have been submitted yet, but as Rocky noted at the beginning of the news conference, for the media that are in attendance, you can indicate if you'd like to ask a question of any of the panelists. You can either submit that question via the chat below or use the raise hand function, and I'll be able to call on you and to elevate you temporarily to a panelist so you'll be able to ask your questions live. So as I said, I don't see any questions that have come in so far, but we'll give that a moment in case there are any that are being entered right now.
And if you have any questions, just indicate who would you like that question directed to, or just throw it out to the group and we'll see who jumps on it. Mm-hmm. And certainly TRIP will be available throughout the day for any follow-up questions that you may have.
I don't see any questions right now, so if there are any, please get those in the next moment. But otherwise, I think I'll send it back to Rocky to wrap things up.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank the panel for taking time out of your busy days, and Again, we appreciate that, and at that we'll conclude the press conference. Thank you.